had some NPCs, sort of hired actors as NPCs. But then what was also happening that after the pervasive game project had ended, and sort of I was looking for what is it that I'm going to be doing in academia when I get to choose it myself. In 2011, sort of I started to find my point of view as a game researcher more widely, where my point of view is coming from role-playing games. Most people in game studies come from digital games or sometimes board games, but point of view of role-playing games and LARPs is something that proved to be valuable in also sort of criticizing things, such as talking about the digital fallacy, where game scholars are writing about all games based on digital games, and from a LARP point of view or a role-playing game point of view, it's nonsensical. But this is something that continued later on as well. In 2012, I was also organizing the role-playing in games seminar. It was the 8th annual Tampere Game Research Lab Spring Seminar. I had participated in organizing these before, and I've done it many times since, but this was the second one that related to role-playing games. I wasn't an organizer in the first one, but I was a visitor there in, I don't remember the year. But this was sort of also interesting, that many of the people who would end up working in or publishing really interesting stuff related to role-playing games and LARP were present in Tampere in 2012. And the International Journal of Role-Playing was founded at this event as well. Then came 2012, or this was 2012. 2012 turned out to be my sex and death year, when I was sort of saying yes to things and ended up doing all kinds of weird stuff. And one of the weirdest things was going to San Francisco to an event called Ars Electronica, with an Ars with an E, which is this event that combines technology and sexuality, always with a third thing, and that year the third thing was games. And I was invited there to give a keynote on sex mechanics in LARP, which I then had to sort of dive into. So I gave a keynote of mapping the different amorous and erotic LARP mechanics from the Nordics and sort of close regions. And this keynote was between a trip to the armory, awarding Ananthropy with an award, a few performances with anal controllers, and trolling Call of Duty players as art. It sounds really awesome, kinda, but it's one of the worst keynotes I've ever given. I went way over time because I was just so excited about my topic, and I wouldn't stop talking about it and demonstrating Ars Amandi on stage and whatnot. So it was a fun trip, and sort of this is where my work related to LARP and erotic starts. But I'm very happy that the keynote wasn't filmed. Then I continued to sort of find my footing in academia, and sort of one of the things that I then started to working on was sort of foundational concepts of game studies, trying to figure out what is it that we mean with these concepts. And one of these was the paper In Defense of a Magic Circle, the social, mental and cultural boundaries of play, in the second version. This is the first version. This is also when I realized that sort of what you name the paper matters a lot. At the time, it was very common to criticize the Magic Circle. There was like 10 papers on like how the Magic Circle sucks. And I was originally writing a paper like that, and then I was, wait a minute. What if I positioned myself as defender of the Magic Circle? Because I was talking about I was analyzing it, how it works, and that turned out to be a really great move because then, since it was so different from the others, it's been widely cited. It is probably my second best title of a paper. The best one is, which doesn't relate to LARP, Through a Shot Glass Darkly, the study of games in the light of drinking games. But then, sort of after the Nordic LARP book dropped, what happened was that suddenly this concept of Nordic LARP had name recognition, and it had marketing potential. So people started calling all kinds of things Nordic LARP, and then there was sort of also boundary keeping and all kinds of things. So what does it actually mean? So at the Nordic LARP talks in Oslo 2013, I gave a talk on what does Nordic LARP mean. It was 3 times as long as Nordic LARP talks are supposed to be. Jok wasn't sort of smiling when she sort of decided to let me have this slightly longer slot to try to sort of figure out what it means. And I came up with the definition, or I presented the definition, a LARP that is influenced by the Nordic LARP tradition and contributes to the ongoing Nordic LARP discourse, which is sort of circular but actually historical. But this isn't my definition, even though it often gets cited. I stole this from Markus Montola, who stole it from Bjarke Pedersen, who stole it from the art world. But and I say it very clearly, but of course people don't hear that. But sort of course, this was also very much criticized, and it continues to be criticized, even I think in the underground secret book of this year. The concept of Nordic LARP is very much debated. But then sort of a sidestep, because sort of over the years, I mean, I hadn't designed any LARPs, except that I had tried to be part of a LARP organizer team a few times, but those LARPs never went anywhere because we just ended up talking about the metaphysics of the LARP they just never materialized. But in hindsight, I realized that sort of I did help out a lot in many LARPs. The executive game was a series of these sort of mafia organized crimes of high stakes poker. There were 5 games played between 2001 and 2005. And they're organized by Mikko Rautalahti fully. But I did pitch in quite a bit in production, scenography, propping, kitchen. But at the time, that went into the category of helping out. But these were sort of things where I was at least doing something sort of actually LARP related. So in these LARPs, the point was to sort of to revel in this atmosphere. It was always, you would have to have like one third of the players had to be smokers in order to have that smoke, and then there was sort of, you were drinking, and there was Frank Sinatra playing on an old LP just to get that kind of a feeling. The feel of the chips was very, very important as well. It was inspired by an episode of The Sopranos. But then in 2012, the year of sex and death, Brody Condon, American artist, contacted me and said that, would you like to come to Glasgow and design a LARP with me where we play with human cadavers, where we play with dead bodies, or not with, but with. The English word with has 2 connotations here. Yeah. So it was, I couldn't say no. So I traveled to Glasgow, and together with Brody Condon, Christine Borland, and Quentin Fogg, we sort of, in the anatomy lab in Glasgow University, we created this LARP that was about this fictional culture. There was a lot of plant communication and sort of human body as a conductor for sound and autopsy and cadavers, and was there crotcheting maybe as well. It was pretty weird. It's maybe cooler than it sounds. No, less cool than it sounds. But it was played by anatomy students, and the idea was that at the time in the UK they were thinking that you can donate your body to science, but should you also be able to donate your body to art? And in England, sort of, that would require a lot of legislative work, whereas in Scotland there was one person who could make the choice that sort of it is possible to test this thing out with artists. So that's what we did at the university, and the idea was to sort of also see if this kind of a LARP could be used to sort of work with empathy of the people doing these autopsies, their empathy towards the people who have donated their bodies. It was a worthwhile exercise. I was playing the 3rd body, which was weird, but it was not a great LARP. But it makes for a great story. And it was worthwhile and interesting, but I don't even now know quite what it was. But there was this specific ambiance that it was going for. The third LARP that I've been involved with was Täydellinen ihminen from 2015, designed and run together with Juhana Pettersson and Tuomas Puikkonen, where the idea is that sort of you're inhabiting the world of stock photos. So the characters had no sexuality, and what anybody ever says is the most exciting thing ever. A lot of the work was sort of gone into sort of lighting the rooms in a way that sort of you would get these fantastic stock photo-like photos. So the idea was to sort of create this surface and sort of see what's behind there. Maria Pettersson, who was producing it, got us this wonderful site for us, which was just amazing to play at. So as you can see from the photos. What I've realized sort of when putting together this presentation is that sort of my LARPs, the three ones that I've been involved with, are not about plot or even character. They're about atmosphere and vibing. So sort of I'm now launching that Jaakko form LARPs are about chilling in an interesting place. Just sort of to be on a different sort of vibe than some of the other presentations that have been on this stage today. In 2015, I also defended my dissertation against against opponent Miguel Sicart, and the dissertation actually doesn't have very much to do with LARP, but the very beginning of it, I start talking about the mustache that I grew for Justice the Loving, and the first 3 pages are about exploring the work that I did through the metaphor of the Justice the Loving mustache, and the opponent, of course, came with fake mustaches that we put on for some time. It was odd. Yeah. Then sort of in 2015 we also sort of together with Markus Montola and Eleanor Saita published in the KP book The Art of Steering, and sort of one of the places where talking about how do we actually play, trying to get away from the ideology that had been created at the time, that sort of the player and the character are very separate, but also sort of seeing the connections between these two. In 2015, I also sort of published the first thing relating to queer content and queer people in role-playing games, sort of this look at representation of queer sexuality in RPG source books. And on the community side, in 2016, after the Solmukohta that was on the ferry, we also set up a Facebook group for sort of queer people in the KP scene. It's difficult to think about that today, but sort of for the longest time, the scene was pretty straight. I mean, I literally would get a phone call from Denmark when another gay guy had started LARP. It's like, there's this new dude. What am I supposed to do with this information? Well, in 2016, we decided. Does this work? Yeah. Yes, I'll speed up very much. So we set up this Facebook group, Hobbits and Other Faggots, and this was a slur that somebody said on the ferry, and we just took it up on ourselves. In 2016, also sort of I published a book, the mixing desk of LARP, the sort of the final version of that, because of course at that time the summer school had taken place many times and the mixing desk had been sort of introduced, but the final version of it hadn't been written down. I had been there a few times teaching, but felt that the final version, because then it evolved over the years, was something that should be documented. So together with the Martins, we put together sort of the latest version of this. It contains maybe the 2 best paragraphs that I've written on LARP in my life. In 2017, me and Markus, we published a book The magic of participation in Harry Potter LARPs. This was about documenting the first 3 College of Wizardry LARPs. And it talks about things like what it's like to LARP for the first time or return to the hobby after a long while, celebrating the community and connecting LARP and fandom studies, how to create sort of these teaching situations in LARPs which are relevant maybe for other school projects, school LARPs as well. But this is maybe the only book that I kind of regret, and not because that I think the book is pretty good, it's just that when it landed, it made no impact. So I have a few copies in my bag if you want to have a copy later on, because yeah. In 2018, the best collection of academic understanding of role-playing games was published. We call it the handbook. It doesn't say handbook on the cover, but everybody knows it's the handbook. And sort of it draws a lot from the KP scene. So many of the things that we've been talking about here and written about, they're being referenced here because we've produced the biggest chunk of thinking on this topic. I'm involved in 4 chapters here on LARPs, transgression, cultural impact, and sexuality and erotic of role-playing games. And this is the place where it says that the correct way to spell LARP in an academic context is in lower caps. A fight I was fighting for a long while. Then sort of in 2017 also the Finnish Museum of Games opened, so it exhibits sort of 100 Finnish games like Alan Wake and Angry Birds, but also non-digital games, and has several tabletop games and 2 LARPs in the exhibition like Halat Hisar and Rajakatse, and sort of did some other exhibitions for there as well, one of them sort of collecting all the tabletop role-playing games that have been published in Finland, and sort of a connecting book that looks into sort of Finnish tabletop-topping from many different angles. In 2019 also the LARP design book came out, a relatively accessible Bible on LARP design on what we've learned in the last 20 years. And it sort of goes from LARP idea to designing the fiction and the characters and the meta techniques to workshop planning, feedbacks, and even feedback on how to export LARP to other contexts. Dozens of authors, something that I'm pretty proud of still. But I still try to sort of test new things, and I was trying to sort of also do LARP critique and this sort of more of a humanistic interpretation of a LARP, but I wasn't really sort of sure about that, so I published on my blog. I'm pretty proud of it, but I've gotten a lot of sort of negative feedback on it as well, because people feel that as a researcher I shouldn't be giving my opinions about these LARPs. Not sure about that. The weird thing that happened after sort of just before the pandemic hit was that suddenly, after being in the outskirts of game studies long enough, people started to sort of remember that, oh, there's this LARP thing, and I started to get invites to do all kinds of keynotes, and this is me in Denver giving a keynote, but I've also given keynotes in Helsinki, Oslo, Copenhagen, San Francisco, Madrid, Landskrona, Canterbury, Utrecht, Tate North, many other places. This one was weird because it's mixed taste, so they always have 2 things that don't really relate to each other, and this is Nordic LARPing and Julia Child, which it was odd. One of the pieces that I'm most proud of is Beauty in LARP that we wrote together with Jamie MacDonald after thinking about 7 years about the aesthetics of LARP. What is beautiful in LARP? Well, we were able to sort of put some words on paper and write about how LARP is beautiful to see and how it's beautiful to do. And sort of the work also relating to sort of queer people and role-playing game also continued. In 2019 we sort of published a paper together with Tanja Sihvonen on queer LARPers, what it's like to be LARP while being queer, and how LARP has contributed to, for example, identity construction. Then the pandemic hit, and sort of community was important, so we did the Knutepedia quiz with Jamie, so sort of celebrating again the community and trying to sort of with the questions lift up the people and also sort of highlight different parts of the community. It was really hard to do that with parts of the community that I don't know about, like crafting and dance, and we always would get our dance questions wrong in the end, or answers wrong. So, but it was one way to hang out together 4 times during the pandemic. And then sort of we did this book on games as culture more generally, and now LARP is included in all of these places. So if there's a museum of out games, LARPs will be there. If there's a discussion book about games as culture, LARP is obviously there. So this work has been continuing. And then after pandemic, sort of I did my second Nordic LARP talk, this time about beautiful boredom. In hindsight, I now understand that sort of this vibing, chilling thing is something that resonates with me. But yeah, and I've also continued work with the erotic, publishing a paper together with Hanne Grasmo on mostly on her work on designing for sexual playfulness. And then I've gotten to the point where now I'm the one who is asked to do forewords. So I've written a few forewords to books. And it's kind of nice because what people can't really talk about their own work and lift it up, but when you write a foreword, you can sort of highlight what is awesome and great about this. So that's kind of a privilege. So sort of the final things to sum up. For me, this is the place where Nordic LARP theory was born. It's when these three young kids walked into the basement in Stockholm and started doing these insane, crappy fanzines. But I was just sort of going through what are the things that the three of us have somehow, the concepts that the three of us have participated in creating or introducing or defining or popularizing or documenting include diegesis steering, Nordic LARP, calibration, brute force design, equifinality, blockbuster LARP, pervasive LARP, bleed, indexicality, ephemera and ruin, beautiful boredom, positive negative experience, invisible rules of role-playing, opposite of tradition, bespoke rules, 360-degree illusion, aesthetics of action, clockwork LARP. There's quite a lot of it. So I'm not saying that it's the place, but it's a place. It's the place that for me it started. And then sort of the other thing is that sort of the very first thing that I wrote that was published was in this magazine. It's a Star Trek fanzine where we wrote about Star Trek comic books. And it was written by me and my friend Mikko Rautlahti, and the third name is the editor of this magazine, Saku Lehtinen. Our text was so terrible that he had to completely rewrite it. But he made it look great, and that's something that I'm very sort of conscious of, that that was a gift that he gave to me, sort of teaching that this is how it's done, to give back to community. And that is sort of what tried to do for the whole journey. I mean, there's survivor bias and quite a bit of privilege and luck, but it seems that sort of committing to the bit, to the weird thing that it is that you're doing, does pay up at the very, very end. So, yeah. LARP is not just about LARP. LARPs may be the core, but there's also so much work being done outside in the community, outside the production of LARP. So we should take more pride in that. Community design and actual production of events and community spaces are also important. The unsung heroes of people who run the wikis and the Facebook groups and the LARP calendars and the whisper networks about broken stairs and the organizers of LARP schools and LARP festivals, and all of these works should be celebrated more as well. But most of all, if it's not written down, it's ephemera and ruin. If we don't make it clear what we have done and why, in a few years, no one will remember. Thank you.